In the autumn of 1994, a shepherd in southeastern Turkey showed a German archaeologist a dusty hill covered in strange flat stones. The archaeologist looked at those stones, and he understood immediately that something beneath that hill was going to change everything. Not some things, everything. What they found was a temple complex built 12,000 years ago, before the wheel, before writing, before agriculture, before every city that has ever existed on this planet. We have spent 30 years excavating it. We have mapped less than 5% of the site, and we still cannot explain who built it, why they built it, or why, when they finished, they buried it completely. This is Göbekli Tepe, and this is what we know. The hill is located 14 miles northeast of Şanlıurfa in southeastern Turkey, in a region that archaeologists call the Fertile Crescent. It is a dry, rolling landscape of limestone and scrub vegetation. The hill itself is unremarkable from a distance, an elevated mound perhaps 50 feet above the surrounding plain, with a rounded profile that could easily be mistaken for any of the hundreds of natural limestone formations in the region. It was not natural. The site had first been noticed by a survey team in 1963. An American researcher noted the presence of flint tools on the surface and logged the location as a possible Neolithic site. He observed what he assumed were the tops of medieval Islamic grave markers protruding through the soil, and moved on. The site sat in an archive catalog for 30 years. In October of 1994, a German archaeologist arrived at the hill after being directed there by a local shepherd who had noticed that the stones he had been walking past his entire life were not the right shape for natural limestone. The archaeologist's name in the historical record is Klaus Schmidt. For the purposes of this account, we will call him Dr. Hartmann. He made the same decision that Schmidt did. He knelt beside the exposed top of one of the stones. He brushed away the soil with his hand. What he uncovered was not the top of a medieval grave marker. It was the upper edge of a T-shaped limestone pillar, carved from a single block of stone. The carving was deliberate, symmetrical, and accomplished with remarkable precision. He stood up and looked at the hill differently. The rounded profile that had seemed natural now looked like something else, like a shape made by the accumulation of fill around large structures buried below. He drove back to Şanlıurfa that evening and began making calls. The first excavation season began in the spring of 1995. What emerged from the earth over the following years would require archaeologists to revise, in fundamental ways, their understanding of what human civilization actually is. The initial trench revealed a full T-shaped limestone pillar standing 18 feet tall and weighing approximately 10 tons. It was not standing alone. In a ring around it, at precise intervals, stood additional pillars of similar dimensions. The ring itself was a circular stone enclosure, deliberately constructed with benches built into the interior wall. The floor was terrazzo, polished limestone terrazzo, applied with skill and intention. This was not a primitive shelter. This was not a hunting camp. This was architecture, deliberate, planned, executed with enormous skill. Dr. Hartmann stood in the first excavated enclosure in the summer of 1995 and understood that the standard account of human prehistory had a very significant problem. The carbon dating results arrived several months later. The organic materials embedded in the site, plant matter, animal bone, soil carbon, dated the construction of the earliest layers to approximately 11,500 years before the present. Some samples suggested the construction may have begun as many as 12,000 years ago. 11,500 years. For context, Stonehenge was begun approximately 5,000 years ago. The pyramids of Giza approximately 4,500 years ago. The oldest known cities in Mesopotamia approximately 6,000 years ago. Göbekli Tepe predates all of them. It predates all of them by 7,000 years or more. And the civilization that built it, by every standard of archaeological evidence available in 1995, should not have been capable of building it. The problem begins with what we believe we know about 12,000-year-old human society. In the standard model, the people alive in 10,000 BCE were hunter-gatherers. They lived in small, mobile groups. They followed seasonal migration patterns of game animals. They did not build permanent structures because their lives did not permit permanence. They had not yet discovered agriculture. They had not yet domesticated animals. They had no writing, no metallurgy, no wheeled transport, no political hierarchy capable of organizing large-scale cooperative labor. They were, by the conventional understanding, not yet capable of what was found at Göbekli Tepe. The site contains a minimum of 20 enclosures. Only a fraction have been fully excavated. The enclosures range in diameter from 30 feet to 100 feet. Each contains between 2 and 12 central T-pillars, standing between 10 and 20 feet tall. The average pillar weighs between 10 and 20 tons. The total estimated stone moved across the site represents hundreds of thousands of tons of limestone, quarried, shaped, and transported from a ridge approximately a quarter of a mile away. The quarrying tools were stone. There is no evidence of metal at the site. There is no evidence of wheeled transport. The people who built this moved hundreds of thousands of tons of shaped limestone using nothing but wooden beams, rope, and human labor. For comparison, the construction of Stonehenge, a far younger and far simpler structure, required an estimated 30 million hours of labor over multiple centuries. The builders of Göbekli Tepe accomplished something of comparable or greater scale, according to the evidence, in a single organized effort. But the physical achievement is not the most disturbing aspect of the site. It is the decoration. The pillars are not plain. They are covered on their surfaces and on the sides and backs facing the interior of the enclosures with elaborate bas-relief carvings. Animals, primarily. Foxes, depicted in extraordinary anatomical detail, vultures in flight, scorpions, snakes in interwoven patterns, cranes, wild boar, aurochs, lions, spiders, a duck with wings spread, and among the animals, abstract symbols, H-shapes, crescents, and geometric forms whose meaning remains entirely uninterpreted. The craftsmanship is not rough. It is not the scratching of a primitive mind making marks in stone. It is skilled, intentional, aesthetically considered. The foxes have fur texture. The birds have individually rendered feathers. Whoever was carving these images had been doing so for a long time before they arrived at this hill. Some of the central pillars, the two largest in each enclosure, always positioned facing each other at the center, have different carvings. They have what appear to be human arms rendered in low relief on their sides. And at the top of each of the central pillars, where the crossbar of the T-shape sits, there is a feature that some researchers have interpreted as a stylized human head. The pillars may not be abstract monuments. They may be figures, beings 12,000 years old, standing in circles in the dark beneath southeastern Turkey. The astronomical dimension of the site has been studied extensively. The central axis of the oldest enclosures aligns to the position of a specific star cluster as it would have appeared on the southern horizon in approximately 10,000 BCE. Other researchers have noted that the site's layout tracks the movements of the sun across the solstices. Whether these alignments are intentional or coincidental remains debated. What is not debated is that the people who built Göbekli Tepe were observing the sky. They were watching, they were measuring, and they built something on this hill that oriented itself to what they found. In 2011, excavators found something beneath the floor of one of the enclosures that had not been anticipated. A small, carved stone vessel. Inside the vessel, a fragment of a human skull, polished, drilled with holes along its edges. Suspended, the researchers concluded, by a cord or sinew, worn perhaps, or displayed. Evidence of a deliberate ritual relationship with the dead that predates the oldest known burial customs by several thousand years. There were 3 human skull fragments found at the site, all modified in the same way. They were published in the journal Nature in 2017. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were not simply building. They were performing, worshiping, organizing, competing perhaps, or cooperating around a shared set of beliefs complex enough to produce this site. And then something changed. Around 10,000 years ago, the site was buried, not collapsed, not abandoned, not left to decay over centuries. Buried, deliberately, intentionally, systematically. The fill that covers the site is not natural accumulation. It is not wind-blown sediment. It is not the slow deposit of abandoned land. It is deliberate fill. Tons of animal bones and flint tools mixed with soil packed densely around and over the enclosures and their pillars. Someone brought this material to the site and used it to cover the structures completely. It required an enormous effort. The same kind of organized, coordinated labor that built the site in the first place. They buried it with the same deliberate intention with which they had constructed it. Why? There is no consensus. There are many theories. Some researchers believe the burial was a form of ritual closing, that the enclosures were meant to function for a specific period and then be sealed. The burial was not destruction, but preservation. Some believe the site was buried to protect it from a specific threat. The timing, approximately 10,000 years ago, coincides with the end of the Younger Dryas, a period of extreme climate disruption that dramatically altered the landscape of the Middle East. If the builders anticipated environmental catastrophe, perhaps they buried what they had made. Some believe the burial itself was the final ritual, that the act of covering the site was the conclusion of whatever the site had been built to accomplish. None of these theories is supported by more evidence than the others. The burial is a fact. The reason is unknown. What is known? The site was buried from above, by hand, by organized human effort, approximately 10,000 years ago. And then the people who buried it walked away, and the hill returned to dust, and there it stayed for 10,000 years, while the wheel was invented, and writing, and empires, and religions, and the pyramids, and the Colosseum, and the printing press, and the steam engine, and the atomic bomb, while all of human recorded history took place above ground. The site was down there, waiting, already ancient when the first city was founded, already ancient when the first words were written. 12,000 years. Waiting. The excavation has continued for 30 years. Progress is slow by necessity. The site is vast. The artifacts are fragile. The funding has been inconsistent. The most recent surveys, using ground-penetrating radar and seismic tomography, have mapped the subsurface of the hill with increasing precision. What the surveys show is that the visible excavation represents approximately 5% of the total site. 5%. There are enclosures beneath the hill that have not yet been entered by modern human hands. There are pillars standing in circles that no living person has seen. There are carvings and perhaps objects and perhaps answers still sealed inside the earth beneath southeastern Turkey, waiting for the funds and the years and the careful hands that will eventually reach them. The primary archaeologist who devoted his career to the site, the researcher we are calling Dr. Hartmann, died in 2014. He collapsed in the field during a working visit. He was 60 years old. He had spent 20 years excavating Göbekli Tepe. He had said, in interviews before his death, that his findings required a fundamental reconsideration of the relationship between religion, society, and civilization. He had said specifically, "First came the temple, then the city. Not the city, and then the temple first. The organized, complex, sustained religious activity of people who had not yet settled into permanent communities. That activity, he believed, was what produced the conditions that eventually led to permanent settlement, to agriculture, to civilization itself." The temple did not emerge from civilization. Civilization emerged from the temple. This is not a fringe idea. It has been published in the most respected archaeological journals in the world. It has been presented at the most respected conferences. It has not been conclusively refuted. It has simply been absorbed slowly into a field of study that is still deciding what to do with it. Because if he was right, then the standard model of human development is not wrong in details. It is wrong in sequence, in cause and effect, in what produces what, in what kind of creature our ancestors were at the beginning of civilization. They were not, as the standard model imagined, primitive. They were organized, symbolic, cosmologically sophisticated, and committed to a shared project of sufficient scale and complexity that they moved hundreds of thousands of tons of limestone over 2,000 years. They painted with light and shadow. They knew the stars. They carried their dead in vessels around their necks. They built something magnificent, and then they buried it. And we do not know why. There is no other site like it on Earth. There is nothing that predates it and demonstrates comparable complexity. It appears, by every measure available, to have been constructed by people with capabilities we have not previously attributed to that period of human history. It is not impossible that other sites of comparable age exist and have not yet been found. The Earth is large, the time period is remote. The tools for finding buried archaeology improve every decade. But for now, Göbekli Tepe stands alone, on that dry limestone hill above Şanlıurfa, still mostly underground, still mostly unknown, still waiting to be understood. The site is open to visitors. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. You can stand on that hill in Turkey and look out at the landscape that those builders looked at 12,000 years ago. The enclosures are there. The pillars are there. The carvings are there. What you cannot do is look beneath the remaining 95% of the hill. What no one alive today has done. What the instruments can see in outline but not in detail. Whatever is down there has been waiting for 12,000 years. It can wait a little longer. Subscribe to this channel if you want to keep investigating the questions that do not have easy answers. We cover the cases that change what we know. Like this video, if Göbekli Tepe belongs on every school curriculum in the world. And in the comments, what do you think the builders were doing here? A temple? An observatory? A monument to something that happened? What do you think they built it for?